Hello, everyone, and welcome back to this Downful Idealistic Crusade. I'm here with James Flower of Arrow Video, who has graciously agreed to chat with me about just the label in general, where they've come from in terms of licensing and releasing, and moving into doing their own restorations, the amazing packages they put together for films, and then just the current state of physical media releasing now that they're not just a UK label anymore. Now they've also moved into US releases and doing dual region releases in both countries. And so, James, thanks for coming on.
Thanks for having me, Spencer. Long time fan of the channel, first time caller or whatever.
Yeah, and we've chatted by email and through social media some. So this is our first face to screen meeting, I guess you'd call it.
Yeah. No, and you've been a tremendous supporter of our stuff and really helpful on a few of our releases as well. So we're very grateful. So yeah, thank you, Spencer, for all of your kind words and all your help.
Oh, I'm glad to do it because, see, just as a physical media fan and collector, I have to say I pulled some things as references because I had to. The first major time I remember, well, I would read about Arrow releases, and this was back when you still had to import just the UK exclusive releases. But I first got clued on to Arrow and your guys' work when you guys were basically just doing UK releases of masters we had gotten released here, but your versions were always of a higher technical quality in terms of having better encoding, using original poster art, ensuring all the legacy extras were on there, plus adding new extras. So the first releases I really remember seeing and knowing I needed to get, and then eventually importing, were the AIP Corman Post cycle films.
Yeah.
So this is the old Arrow Blu-ray of Pit the Pendulum, and this still has some really awesome exclusive extras. And this was head and shoulders above what we had here in the US, even though it was primarily using the same masters. And for some of the other films, they were older masters, so you were really limited to what you could do. But you could tell even back then, 2014, 2015, 2016, that Arrow was putting in extra effort even when it was a limited master made, who knows how many years ago. And it wasn't the most famous films in the cycle, but all of them were getting additional effort, and you could just tell the difference in that people were putting in the care even back then.
Absolutely. And, I was a fan of the label long before I started working for them. And it very much right from the start of when Arrow Video came on, actually, which was 2010, I think, it was when they first started releasing the white label releases. They were kind of in the kind of the white boxes of Martin and Dawn of the Dead, and kind of I'll talk in a minute, I guess, about the origins of Arrow Video and how it all started. But for years I was like very inspired by the standard that they worked to, that good enough was not good enough, that it was aiming for more, aiming for something greater. And perfect is not a word that a label with any common sense would ever use, because what's perfect, and I think if anyone, certainly you would never print that on the packaging, because it's a very tricky thing to shoot for, and everyone's got a different idea of what that is. But certainly aiming for best practice, and for, as you say, trying to carry over as many legacy extras, and just taking real care in the presentation. That was the standard that I certainly wanted to work at. And when I started working in the company, I was thrilled to do it. And all these years later, with all the changes that's happened in the company, it's a very different, literally a very different company, certainly from an organizational standpoint. That's still the standard that I shoot for, and what we kind of generally aim for. So yeah, that's absolutely, completely agree.
Yeah, you can feel when a label, in terms of just looking at releases, you can always tell the difference, just as a film fan or a physical media collector. You can always tell the difference between and a company just acquiring the license and putting out the material, and then a company where there's been attention to detail and care put in. You can feel the effort, even if it's not the fanciest release, or it's a pre-existing master as opposed to a new restoration, or a box set compared to a standalone release. You can tell, once you've seen enough physical media releases, you can tell the difference between a company that puts in that extra effort and tries to attain that mythical perfect status that it's
Yeah, and
never quite there. It's always forever elusive, but there's a difference between people who try to chase that, or try to attain that, and the others who unfortunately don't do that.
no, and I mean, some of that is financial, some of that is just having the money to be able to put in some of those additional resources in that time, which, is not every company has the ability to do that. That's something where, I mean, God, if I were starting my own label now and was starting with kind of meager resources, I, would not necessarily have the ability to do everything that I have the privilege of doing at Arrow, which is not my company. I'm just a salary employee, sorry, a salaried employee. But where the budgets are on the whole pretty damn generous, and kind of they give you the opportunity to plug in those gaps and go down those avenues of research, and fight for these things in a way that might be trickier to do otherwise. But of course, some of it as well as having the determination to do it, which I'm not sure which comes first, whether it's the chicken or the egg, but certainly it's one of the things that's a real privilege about working for this company in particular, and that you are able to go that extra mile in a way that other companies, for one reason or another, either aren't willing to do, or they're just not able to.
Right.
So that's something that I hope that at Arrow we're going to be able to carry on doing for as long as possible.
Well, I guess I'd like to ask about your history and getting into this realm of constantly thinking about how can I fix film problems, and how can I take care of this particular issue that I didn't expect to run into ever, and how that sort of links with the development of Arrow Video as a label, and then maybe how it is now versus how it is when you started in both the industry and working at Arrow. Because I know you've discussed before that you previously had thought about starting your own label, but wound up going to Arrow about the same time.
Yeah. So I kind of, I mean, I always loved movies from when I was a very young age. I was sort of became a sort of hardcore, film fan, the kind that is able to absorb names of people and directors of films, even if I've never seen them. And, that's for whatever reason, that was the way that my brain worked from a very early age. And, originally I thought, oh, okay, well, I should go into making films, which was kind of all I knew you could do with loving film back then. But ultimately kind of realized that really what I was really interested in was the presentation of films. And this all kind of coincided with, I'd always collected VHS and DVD, loved DVDs and all the extras on that. And seeing how, a kind of a package for a film is kind of curated and put together, and how that film is presented, and all the contextual material that goes around it. I loved all of that. And so I kind of eventually wound up doing a master's degree in film archiving at the University of East Anglia, which was great, which was, spending a year kind of really reconfiguring how I thought about films in terms of, it's not just, the mise-en-scène or the plot or, whatever. It's actually the formats and how it was shot, and, the labs connected with it, all these kind of things that are trivia really, but, have really become an essential part of the narrative on the history of that film. So that, I thought I was going to go from that straight into working for the BFI, which didn't happen. I got a job across the street from the BFI, but I didn't get a job at the BFI. Wound up working for a kind of an independent distributor in London that did kind of art house films and cinemas called Soda Pictures, which was then acquired by a company called Thunderbird, a Canadian company, and so the name changed there. But every now and then they would do an older film, so they would do a Jim Jarmusch box set or a Kelly Reichardt box set. And as I said, I loved Arrow right from the start, and so the project I had at Soda, which was kind of my not just my rehearsal, my audition piece, I guess, for Arrow in a way, was we released a film called The Reflecting Skin, which is kind of an odd British Canadian kind of art house horror film with Viggo Mortensen in an early role. And I went to town on that. I was already kind of familiar with the director and had known him for a while, so we interviewed him. We actually were releasing another film that Viggo Mortensen was in, and he was in town to promote the film, so we got an interview with him talking about the film. That was wild. He's still the most famous person that I've filmed an interview for kind of in my career, which is pretty crazy. Well, I guess Terry Gilliam, I don't know, maybe one way or the other, I guess. But anyway, a couple, and around this time, I had gotten to know Fran, or kind of Fran had become aware of my existence. I think he was maybe a fan of putting it too strong, but he was certainly aware of what I was doing at Soda, and we would have chats every once in a while. And after a couple of years, Soda had changed its name and was taking on a more kind of commercial direction, which was a bit boring. I kind of eventually decided, well, I still want to do something like what Arrow were doing, but Arrow were never going to hire me. They never, they only seem to hire people they know, and they never seem to put out job ads. So I'm just going to start up my own little hobby label and see how that goes. And so I acquired the rights to a film called Over the Edge, which I loved. And the rights were available. The HD master was pretty decent. No one else had put it out on Blu-ray, so I thought, okay, that'll be a good one. That'll be a good kind of test film to do. So came back from my honeymoon and met the sales agent for Over the Edge and got the UK video rights for the film. And then, I don't know, like 2 weeks later, Arrow advertised the producer job. And so I kind of had this, fork in the road to decide, okay, am I going to try and make a success of this, little hobby label, or am I going to go for the Arrow job and sort of see what happens? And went for the Arrow job and have never regretted it since, because one, I think the other one might have been a disaster in terms of where the industry wound up going, and perhaps my own lack of experience or whatever as a business person. I don't know if that would have necessarily gone very well, but just in terms of we wound up doing Over the Edge through Arrow instead, and the opportunities of what I've gotten to work on and what I've gotten to do in the years since have just been extraordinary. And it's been a real dream job in terms of the breadth and diversity of the projects I've gotten to do and the level I've gotten to do them at. So I'm forever grateful to Fran Simeone and Kevin Lambert, who were my bosses at the time, for giving me the opportunity to let me do it, and just giving me the freedom to let rip and just kind of do big crazy things and take big swings. So that's taken me to where I am now, I suppose.
Yeah, it's an interesting sort of journey, and I know I myself have dreams of starting my own label since I even realized what the concept of really what was termed back then a special edition was. Even back just as a teenager and primarily in the DVD era. I mean, I still have pipe dreams of I literally will daydream about supplemental features packages, or what if I could find the audio elements for this and have the original, all the original audio mixes for this film, and what films need help and such.
I think every fan does. I mean, how could you not? I mean,
yeah, exactly.
My dad said to me once when I was a teenager, he was very sensible. He said, well, you should probably be careful about doing your hobby as your job. That seems like something that might not always be a good thing. And I said, shut up, Dad. What are you talking about? And every now and then, I hate to say it, he is right sometimes, because it is,
when you hit those problems and that seem unsolvable, and it's like, this used to be fun. I'm looking at a screen at 2 a.m. and was tearing my hair out and going, I used to like this.
Well, I don't stay up till 2 a.m. anymore. I've enforced a kind of strict work-life balance in that regard.
Yeah.
But no, I mean, I think sometimes that kind of work-life balance can be a tricky thing where, and look, this is a real first world problem. I'm not pretending otherwise. I'm incredibly lucky to get to do what I do, and I don't want to pretend otherwise. But it's the irony of all of this is I don't particularly enjoy watching films at home anymore. I love going to the cinema, but I don't tend to stay home watching Blu-rays that much.
You've seen too much behind the curtain.
A little bit, yeah. But
yeah.
I mean, that still hasn't oddly enough, it still hasn't dimmed the fire to come back to the other part of your question in terms of the presentation of films and how important it is to have every version and have them done correctly and all the rest of it. That's I'm trying to think back to what that could be. I mean, some of it again is just being a DVD fan and hitting upon certain milestone films, I suppose, that had all of those issues, and seeing that. And something like Army of Darkness, for example, is a good example where there's like 4 official versions of that film. There've been a million DVDs, and it took forever for there to be like a semi-decent presentation of the director's cut. That film, for example, along with plenty of the other Evil Deads, have had their own problems. I mean, growing up as a British film fan in a time of censorship, when that was still happening a lot, the BBFC still being very active in the 1990s, when I was coming of age as a film fan.
No headbutts.
Exactly. No headbutts, no daggers, no whatever. That was, no nunchucks. That was very formative. And it's funny, you and I have both been interviewed by our mutual acquaintance, Devin Scott, about this recently for an article he's writing. The explosion of message boards and fan communities that are around, not just home media, but ultimately about homebrew presentations, less so fan edits maybe, but more in terms of back before the Blu-ray era, really trying to do custom presentations of things. That's something that I was all over. I was less active maybe in terms of actually making the stuff, but certainly the message boards and reading about it, I was really interested in all of that around the same time I was doing my master's degree. And so the idea of the edit of a film never being something that's fixed, and something where even if they're well-meaning, sometimes the companies that are responsible for the stewardship and the presentation of these edits not always being reliable is that's something that was very ingrained in me very early on. And so certainly going into Arrow and having one toe in that world of well, this is what the fans do as well, and this is what the ideal would be if all the stars aligned and you could do all of these things. That was where my head was at when I going into Arrow, and going into a lot of the projects that I've had to do since, which have involved multiple different versions. I mean, you've got some of them lined up behind you. It's that's a real that all comes from really a lot of that being just my experience of being a fan, and just what I would want to see of some of these things from the start.
Yeah, I think it's really important that you've got the natural fan background, but also not just a master's degree in film, but a master's degree specifically about archiving from the archival standpoint. And having those 2 elements linked is actually in a lot of ways what I've always appreciated about Arrow as a label, that they've had one foot in the we're about the preservation of a film as its entire experience, but at the same time we're also fans too. So we're not just going to do the accepted, tried and true things that everybody talks about and the critical establishment has on the pedestal. We're going to do cult films, and we're also going to do popular films that are obviously going to be big sellers. But it's always been a nice balance between the, I guess, more of the professional ethos and the we're still fans too side of it too. It's like it's a nice synergy between the two that I think is part of the. I mean, if labels have an identity,
Sure.
there's a unique sort of identity for Arrow.
Well, I suppose that's a good opportunity to talk about the history of the company in terms of the trajectory of where it's been, and I don't know where it's going. Maybe that I'm not the best person to speak to that, but certainly where it is now. So I mean, Arrow. Before Arrow Video, there was Arrow Films, which was a little family-run, really, distribution company that. So a guy called Neil Agran started it in 1991, and he had been a film industry veteran who he'd worked in the 70s. He'd run a company called Target International, hence where Arrow comes from. And they'd released Dawn of the Dead in cinemas, and in 1991 he starts Arrow Films. I think their first film actually was Peter Jackson's Meet the Feebles. Certainly it was a very early release for them that they released in cinemas and on video back then. And they, again, it remained this kind of little family company for nearly 20 years. It was kind of, so eventually he kind of handed the reins to his son, Alex, who was still the CEO of the company when I joined in late 2018. So right about 2010, Alex is approached by a PR guy called, I'm going to mangle his name, I'm very sorry, Almar Haflitzen, who runs a company called Fetch PR that we still work with now. So Almar said to Alex, look, you've got video rights to all of these kind of cult films, Dawn of the Dead, Martin, Two Evil Eyes, whatever else. And, why don't you start kind of like a dedicated kind of Blu-ray label that's kind of, puts together special features as, Anchor Bay and all of these other companies do. And, Alex gave it a shot, and it was kind of quite successful. And then he had the bright idea to hire this, young buck named Francesco Simeone, who I think was only 25 or 26 at the time. And really, not to kind of do a disservice to Alex, who obviously had the company in the first place, but Fran is the one who was really responsible for the drive and the ambition and the curation of Arrow Video and Arrow Academy, which is very much his baby, over those next few years. He was sort of the main person who really set the foundation for what Arrow was and what we as fans kind of loved about it. So very clever, very ambitious. He brought in people like Kevin Lambert, who was at Eureka, James White, who had worked for the BFI and Deluxe and was freelance at that time. He brought him in as a kind of in-house restoration guy, which was not a thing that any other label, certainly in the UK, was doing at that point. You had labels who were like Synapse who were doing stuff in the US, but someone in the UK really taking that aboard and really trying to take on that mission of aiming for a standard that was at that point kind of exclusive to Criterion, really. Criterion were the only ones who, they still obviously have the benefit of having been the first ones to do this and having been around longer than anyone, and certainly they have the money to kind of to put that behind everything now. Fran was not shy about his ambition in terms of aiming for Arrow to go bigger and better and equal Criterion if they could. So on the one hand, Arrow was very much kind of the Criterion of cult. That's kind of a label that's been put on it, not by itself, but by other people in the past. And, it would release George Romero films, Dario Argento films, John Carpenter films, as well as the art house stuff from the Arrow Academy side, which I think, as we've seen from Radiance in recent years, this is, that's really where kind of, not that Fran doesn't like genre stuff, but I think his heart really lies in kind of, the classic Italian films. And, but yeah, like I said, when I joined the company in 2018, it was at a really interesting point in the business where Arrow Films, which had previously done a lot in terms of it released a lot of films in UK cinemas and did a lot of stuff with TV, had a lot of success in like kind of Scandinavian crime drama shows and importing those. And it was really at the point where it was setting a lot of that aside and thinking, okay, Arrow Video, the boutique Blu-ray side is the part of the business that consistently makes money and is very successful. This is kind of what we're going to focus on, because certainly theatrical was not making any money at that point. It was really, really difficult to kind of, the art house and kind of that sector was really not doing very well, which had been my experience on the company I had been working for as well. So, and then sort of post kind of 2021, so we'd come out of lockdown, and lockdown had been, as horrible as it had been a great thing for Arrow in terms of it was during that, everyone was staying in watching Blu-rays and spending a lot of time and money on that. And we'd also just broken into 4K, which has year on year become just, it's re-energized the company, not just in terms of being able to re-release the films that, did well before, but also it's a whole new audience. And it's a audience that's really latched onto the possibilities and the potential of 4K. So 2021, at some point, Alex decides to sell Arrow to THD, the Hut Group, which at that time owned Zavvi. So there were a lot of synergies that kind of it was felt that Arrow and Zavvi kind of would go hand in hand very well. That was the logic behind the acquisition. And as it happened, Zavvi didn't do terribly well, and THD wound up kind of letting them go, but keeping Arrow. So we're kind of still to this day, kind of an outlier in their portfolio because there's nothing else really like it. But we're still a company that actually, in spite of all of that, does tremendously well, and it's one of the highest earning companies in that portfolio. So they're very happy to have us on board and kind of throw us a bunch of money to kind of support what we do, which is obviously very helpful and kind of enables to take big swings like Stranger Things and so on. But yeah, after the THD acquisition, Fran decided that he wanted to start Radiant, and so those of us who kind of sort of stayed on kind of had to kind of find a bit of a new way of working, really. I mean, we were very kind of attached to, we wanted to make sure that we kept what made Arrow a success even after those people left, and that was that attention to detail, that those kind of key partnerships with certain licensors. And it was a really tricky time when post-COVID, quite a lot of the studios and a lot of companies were changing the way they did things. So one of the kind of big kind of key things that changed after that was that we brought on Cliff McMillan to the company, who was at Shout Factory for many years, and then kind of jumped over to us, and he brought over the relationship with Warner. So that they are now kind of really one of, if not our main licensors for films. And we're very, very fortunate in that George Feltenstein, who is our key contact there, is a massive supporter of what we do. He's very happy with the way that Arrow have treated the films and the extra mile that we've gone to for everything that we've done and the quality of our restorations. And so that relationship is really, I think, a key part of where Arrow is now. And it's a very busy space. It's very different from what it was even when I started. There's a lot of companies out there that are kind of vying for the same films or the same attention. So naturally, Arrow has kind of shifted its priorities in terms of the types of films it's acquiring, and some of that is a bit different. And my hope is that that can kind of, even if it's been a little kind of mainstream, it's been quite mainstream recently, but that we can ultimately expand to do all types of movies. We can take risks, and hopefully our success can afford us the opportunity to do that. But yeah, it's interesting times for sure.
It really is, especially with the UHD format now being established and hitting a certain percentage of how many households have jumped into 4K and UHD, and after getting over the hurdles of getting used to the format, I'm sure for you guys that was had a lot of growing pains of getting everything figured out, and how are you going to handle HDR, and do any of the masters you're given actually have they been completed in HDR, and how do you work with this? And it's based on the Blu-ray format, but it's very finicky, and it's got a whole lot of quirks of its own. But Arrow is really, I mean, you guys are really leading the charge in terms of getting such major titles, particularly from the amazing Warner licenses that you're able to actually get, and double down on not just the restoration efforts and bringing stuff into the 4K realm, but producing truly substantial supplements packages and upgrading films that have needed this level of work for so long that most of us kind of figured they were just going to be stuck that way, especially titles that had a number of really heavy preservation issues, whether it be the Conan films or the Bruce Lee films, especially, and now moving into the Golden Princess titles, bringing over what the work that Shout has done, and then most of all the lifetime of preservation problems that the Leone films have had, which is
Sure.
I had to think for a second, how do I even put it into words? it's because it's so much.
I mean, you've done 3-hour video essays about it, so I mean, just have good luck finding a sentence to sum it up.
Yeah,
But
exactly. How to cram it all into one. I guess my next question would be, as a disc producer, or I think that's your title relatively, or
So now I'm the head of production. So I've actually had a promotion or two since then. So basically,
yeah.
I started out as a disc producer, and then a senior disc producer once I'd kind of proved my worth. And once Fran and Kev left, I then kind of stepped up and to run the department basically. So rather than doing any kind of full-time production myself, which I only do kind of in limited cases, my main remit now is to sort of supervise the team of 5 full-time producers that we have. So there's Neil Snowden, Michael McKenzie, Samuel Thierry, Finlay Fox, and last but not least, Nora Maheny, who was Arrow's QC manager for years and then left to be a disc producer at Indicator/Powerhouse, and quite recently has come back to Arrow, and she's doing tremendous work already in a very short amount of time. But like a really talented, really clever, really passionate group of people. My job basically is to, well, there's 2 aspects. There's kind of the more boring admin side, which is trying to make sure everything gets finished on time and on budget, which, that's one side of things. But I like to think, part of my role is to help make everything better. So whether it's just, making sure that, every opportunity is kind of taken and helping out with that where I can, and, stepping in only when necessary to make sure that, everything is the best it can be, to kind of give them the benefit of my experience as well. But yeah, it's, and just kind of having it more of a big picture view, I guess, just making sure that, seeing kind of the whole schedule that we've got lined up for not just the rest of this year, but all of next year as well. And just making sure how everything kind of ties in with each other, and saying, okay, well, if we've got that, then we should also do this with this title as well. And so yeah, it's a pretty, you're spinning a lot of plates, you're juggling a lot of balls at any one time. But it's, as a film fan, as a film nerd, it's, like I said, it's great to be able to, it's a real privilege to get to do this stuff day in, day out.
In a lot of ways, it honestly sounds like you are a version of, in the old studio system days, you're like a version of the old division chiefs or division heads who would have to oversee all the different productions going on, and their producers and directors, and have to keep track and figure out the allocation of things and resources, and also what issues are going on with which project, and how to, and basically kind of bouncing between all of those, and keeping track, while occasionally stepping in and working as a producer on a specific title. I would assume that's also if Arrow manages to get the rights to like one of your favorite films. It's like, all right, guys, I want to do this one.
Sure. Well, at the very least, that's where I become maybe a little bit more micromanaging than I would do otherwise. That's which, I think I've been forgiven for on the 1 or 2 times that's happened. But yeah, I mean, Arrow's actually, I mean, it's quite a big company for kind of the type of company it is. So for a kind of a boutique Blu-ray, I mean, I don't know if you could call it an independent nowadays, just based on who owns us. But so Arrow kind of across the different departments of the company, there's kind of, I think, 42 people that work for Arrow, and that encompasses not just me and my team and the technical team that do the restorations. There's also the Engine House, who are our in-house authoring team. There's sales, marketing, our digital team. There's some theatrical, the finance team as well. So it's a pretty big spread of people, not all of whom are film fans necessarily. There's people who are coming from a range of different backgrounds and different disciplines. And even though I'm a member of the senior management team and I have some kind of input and kind of influence over what happens kind of on a kind of wider company level, it's like I said, it's not my company, so I certainly don't have control over all of it. So I only say that in so much to say that Arrow is kind of as a business, as an enterprise, is very, it's a big ship. So that's kind of, so I mean, but other than kind of that's sort of the bigger picture of the company in general. But my kind of focuses, like I said, it's generally more narrow. It's more about like the day-to-day of our physical releases, and my team being responsible for everything that goes on the disc. So, but that's just working with the technical team, obviously, who are responsible for the restorations, but deciding what the extras are going to be, and what versions of the film we're going to include, and how those are going to be kind of presented, and then also the packaging and the artwork as well. So that kind of all falls within me and my department and what we do. And yeah, that gives you some idea of kind of in terms of other departments. Obviously, we it's very collaborative. But I mean, I have some input to acquisitions, for example, which is another department. So what films we're going to buy, my expertise, such as it is used and kind of consulted for some of that. But it's like I say, it's not all my decision. We don't always necessarily have. We can't have any film that we want. We're limited to a pool as to what's available and what we can get from a licensor. But while I'm giving the opportunity to kind of feedback on that, it's ultimately another department that's doing that. So in terms of where we sit within the kind of general kind of structure of Arrow, that kind of gives you some idea, which is a bit different from like I said, when I first joined the company, when Fran and Kev were not just running the department, but they were also doing acquisitions. So it was a much more kind of direct, this is what we're putting out, this is the vision of the company, as opposed to nowadays, where it's spread a little wider across a few different departments.
That kind of leads me into my next question I had of, I guess it's more of asking about the day-to-day operations, or getting a little bit into the nitty-gritty of, okay, let's say you're looking at perhaps acquiring a title, or a title is basically offered or available, going from that in terms of probably allocating your budget and what you can and can't afford, or what other projects you're working on. How does that go into the sort of work or pipeline? And then, when you're working as a disc producer at Arrow, how do you go about determining, okay, which titles do we get to do a complete restoration, and then which titles are going to be from studio or rights holder provided materials, and then also getting other materials and going through any sort of restoration work, regardless of if it's a full restoration, or if it's just getting other audio tracks, and then also looking at putting together the supplements package and the artwork and the packaging. Just basically, if you could, to give everybody an idea of what the general workflow is, and the day-to-day experience. And of course, this would just be one example, while you're probably working on I don't know how many at the same time.
Sure. So yeah, once a title is acquired, or a package of titles is acquired, I guess, it's then kind of taken to my team, and a producer is assigned. Either it's someone who puts their hand up immediately and says, I love this movie, I want to do it, or it's kind of assigned at random, and then regardless, either way, whether they know the film already or not, it's the same kind of processes are there in terms of what already exists for this film, what holes need to be filled. If there's no extras at all, then that kind of means that ideally you need more budget to kind of be able to produce more, to kind of fill some of those gaps. But the budget is usually kind of worked out while the film is being acquired. So there's a process whereby we kind of predict to some degree, based on comparables of previous releases, how much it's likely going to make and how much we can spend on it. Restoration is part of that as well. So, we kind of know with some degree of predictability what it's going to cost to restore it in 2K versus 4K. That restoration, again, if the film's already been restored and it's a very good restoration and we don't need to do it, then fine. That sort of, hopefully we know in advance whether or not that needs additional work, if that's something that we're even allowed to do. So, some of that research, that's a pretty intrinsic part of that. Um, and then often by that point, a kind of a tentative release date is penciled in for the film. So this is what we're aiming for in terms of the deadlines, in terms of this is when we want to have the extras and the artwork and the restorations all done and dusted by, which is usually some months before the release, and it's usually, I don't know, 2 or 3 months before the titles are even announced to the public. So it used to be, so we announced titles 3 months before the release date, and it used to be, when I first started, we were a lot more cavalier about sometimes announcing things before we'd even finished not just the restoration, but we might not even have any of the extras commissioned. It was a lot crazier back then and a lot more stressful. Nowadays it's a bit more kind of set in stone, or it's a lot more set in stone, I should say. The disc is usually authored by the time that the film is announced to the public. So as heartbreaking as it is sometimes when the title's announced and people kind of email going, "Oh, I've got this rare thing," it's like, sorry, it's too late, we can't do anything about it. Which is a real shame, but that's hopefully, if we've done our homework most of the time, it's it hopefully doesn't apply, and hopefully we've already been able to do something with it. But yeah, so that process of then there are certain suppliers that we work with for bonus features on a pretty regular basis, in terms of producers out in LA and New York and London and different places that specialize in filming interviews, and the team of producers often have pretty good contacts, and in terms of people who are good at commentaries and booklet essays, and we tend to work with the same people quite often, in terms of people that we know are reliable and will work to a budget and a deadline. Because even though there are people who might be really great and really talented people, at the end of the day, if you can't make your deadlines, we're not going to be able to work with you. That's an unfortunate reality, where some people who are great, we can't necessarily work with them anymore, because it's just a bit too much of a liability, because we need to have some consistency and predictability in knowing when that material is coming in, and knowing that we can author it ahead of that release date. So that's kind of where things stand now, in terms of our general kind of everyday, day-to-day, in so much there is such a thing. I mean, every project is different. This is the thing. So every film has its own unique quirks and kind of things that that are working against you, or that you need to kind of factor in. And so being able to kind of anticipate those and predict those and work around those is a pretty heavy amount of the research that we do when we're starting those projects up.
I'm glad you said that, you touched on that, because that was going to be my next question, or that was one of the points I really wanted to stress in our chat, because I don't know if many people realize that every film or title is a challenge, and they're all different, because
Absolutely.
there's what elements exist, how were they shot, produced, and finished originally, and could there have been an issue there? Are there multiple audio tracks? Are there multiple cuts? Is everything still existing? Does the rights
Absolutely.
holder have all this stuff? What do we have that we can actually access? There's so many different things. And then my next question was going to be, when you guys are working on a title and you run into a particular issue, whether it be noticing, hey, this film has not had good audio for however many years in releases, or is there a point at which you go back to the rights holder and say, hey, do you guys have anything else? And then if they don't, then you're sort of wondering, scratching, going, okay, now what do we do? But basically, what happens when you reach those various points of, okay, we have to either find new elements or figure out a way to make this work, or we can't locate certain things. Basically, if you could talk a little bit about the various headaches and not so fun problems they don't talk about when you first get into this sort of business.
Well, I think it's pretty fun, actually. I think even though it's a pain in the butt, it's still pretty fun sometimes to kind of work around some of these problems. But yeah, I think, we're talking more about the technical side of things than about the restoration side of things. So I'm going to be a bit careful in terms of speaking for my colleagues, my namesakes, James White and James Piercy, who are, who do tremendous work, along with another colleague called Matt Mayo, who, pull off miracles on a very demanding schedule. And they all come from kind of an archival training, so they have that headset of what is the original presentation supposed to be, what is what is best practice, as opposed to the cheapest and the fastest way of doing this. And I'm trying to think of a good example, a specific one. I mean, you talk about sound. Sound is an interesting one where it wasn't necessarily a priority for us for a long time, as I don't think it was for many companies, but it's become, there is increasing scrutiny on it now, to the point where I would love us to employ a full-time sound person. Hopefully that's something that might happen one day, but it's something that is taking up an increasing amount of our time, because the way that sound elements degrade over time, and the way that we have to sometimes look for alternatives, it does become a full-time job. So we're certainly, if we're supplied something by the licensor where we think, oh, this is a bit noise reduced, or there's some other issue with it, that's where the research comes in, and where if we don't have access to original mag tracks or whatever the original sources might be, the most optimal sources, which often we're not, either they don't survive, or it's just not something that's a part of the deal that we have with the company that licenses the film. So we have to find other workarounds, whether that is working with people such as yourself to find home video releases from the past that have better quality audio, or whatever that might be. I mean, we will kind of take from whatever we think the kind of best quality is, even if it's a DVD. And obviously, in an ideal world, you would have a generation above that. You would have something that is doesn't have that baked-in compression. And I should add, that's something we do extremely rarely. I don't want to make it sound like
that's a last-ditch effort,
yeah,
but
I don't want to make it sound like we're doing
it's
that
not
all the time.
it's not necessarily the format, it's the material and the mastering that counts.
Yes,
I
absolutely.
once you realize that, I always tell people the best way of describing it is you can have a very hyper processed, lossless mono track, or you can go back to, sometimes in the case of a DVD, a lossy Dolby Digital mono track, but it was transferred from a quality source and doesn't have that additional processing and noise reduction. Yeah, it may be a small file, but it's as good as you can do for some films. Or
Yeah,
the original Dolby Digital codec, which was enormously tiny, the 384 kilobits per second. But
yeah.
I have, to this day, there are many laser discs that are Dolby Digital in that tiny file size, but because back then they were primarily porting over the theatrical audio tracks, which Dolby Digital
Mm.
theatrically was even smaller. It was like 320 kilobits per second.
Hmm.
But it's basically the same. And there are a number of titles that I've found, and others have experienced too, where you put on that original Laserdisc, and yeah, that file size might be tiny, but you would not notice it, because you're just getting blown through the back of your home theater because they're so impactful. And then you go to the latest and greatest modern version that might have a DTS HDMA lossless codec. The sound quality level is not always there. If
Mm.
someone has gone in and remixed it, or done a home theater remix, or a newer codec, they don't always maintain the qualities of the original mix and the balance and the levels and things. So it's not always the format that counts.
No, and I think there's a misconception that when we license these films, we can access whatever we want, and we can do whatever we want with it. We just get the like a menu with, okay, this is where all the mag tracks are, this is where this is, and blah 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 blah. That's
It becomes
often
a
not the case.
scavenger hunt. And I
Sure,
I
absolutely,
was going to ask, I guess it depends, going deal to deal and license to license, because
very
you
much so.
guys don't
Yeah.
always have the ability to go, hey, can you guys search your other vault, because we're wondering if there's this, because I'm sure there are plenty of projects where you guys are just limited to what you're given, and then maybe what you might be able to source
Hmm.
on your own, and that's literally it.
Absolutely. I mean, particularly nowadays when, a lot of the companies that we're talking about have gone through a lot of consolidation, a lot of redundancies, and some of those teams are pretty stretched thin as it is. And, this was even before, the paperwork and the specifics of what element has what is not often there to start with anyway. So, just being able to say, "Oh, do you have that soundtrack that has this very specific thing about it?" And that's, oh, how are they going to? There's no way for them to find that really. So, and certainly as we are in a kind of actually quite kind of limited position in terms of being, it's not our material. We don't own it. We are a licensor. So we're coming at it with a very limited sort of set of rights and, abilities of exploitation compared to maybe if it was an official restoration done by a studio where they would maybe have a bit more budget and ability to be able to comb the vaults. Whereas we are working from an office in London and we have,
At the back door, doing a polite knock. Hey guys, can you give us a minute?
well, I mean, you are often dependent on the charity and goodwill of an employee to be able to search for some of the stuff on your behalf, and sometimes that's not possible, and understandably so, because everyone's very busy and there's a lot to do. We're certainly not the only company that they're dealing with, so that's often a case where you might have to be resourceful and look for alternatives, and every studio, I don't want to limit this to just the Hollywood studios because obviously we deal with a range of licensors from all around the world, but every company is very different and every company has a very different way of working and a very different handle on the assets they own and the kind of knowledge of what goes into them. So that's a big part of the job as well, being able to work around some of that. So Warner are a dream company in this respect because they, George and his team have a great knowledge of what's in their vault and are really supportive in terms of allowing us access to answer prints or other things that can help us do what we think is a best quality, theatrically accurate grade or sound mix or whatever it is. That's like, again, that's the dream scenario. But there are still limitations. There are still, it's still a pretty small team that he's working with, and they don't necessarily know where everything is. So that's one side of it for sure, where we do as much as we can within the limitations of what we have to work with. But sometimes, hopefully, we get it right and they're able to get it more often than we get it wrong. But sometimes, again, we're working on at least 24 projects at any one time, so there's a volume and issue to it as well, and time being finite and us being not able to do everything that we would want to do. I don't want to sound too much like I'm making excuses, but it's these are kind of the day-to-day realities of what we're doing, where it's often dependent on the passion that we put into it and that willingness to kind of go the extra mile and maybe break some of those boundaries I was talking about earlier in terms of thinking, okay, I'm just going to spend a couple more hours trying to dig up this thing or try and find out what this thing is. And that's where the kind of the passion is a kind of a really important part of it, as well as your dependency on the goodwill of others and their willingness to go the extra mile for you as well.
Yeah, it's not an exact science to
No,
begin with. You
absolutely not.
you do everything the best that you can, and as you said, you've got so many additional constraints. Plus, you're having to license titles and work with large studios or different rights holders, and you've got your own budget and schedule and time crunch, and working on so many different things at the same time, and then the different teams, and so at the end of the day, it's all about, can we increase the level? Can we raise the preservation and presentation level of a film? With the goal of getting it as good as we can get it. It's nothing's ever going to be truly perfect. That's that mythical status
Sure.
to chase. But at the end of the day, everything is about how much can we increase that preservation and presentation level. Can we improve on a film's status as much as we can?
Absolutely. And a huge amount of that is time, just having the time to work for things. And that's actually, again, where we kind of have a luxury at Arrow where we know what we're going to be doing a certain amount of time in advance. And, for some projects, we can allocate more time and resources if we think it's worth it. So the Dollar Trilogy is a great example where we were working on those for, God, close to a year and a half, just in terms of really intensive searching for elements, figuring out what the differences between different versions were, trying to find the best audio sources, all of the stuff that just really, it was a real labor of love. And we were obviously tremendously fortunate to have the support of not just MGM and Park Circus, our licensors, but also the fan community, working with people like Benji Heron and Jordan Krug and Devin Scott and Willa Ross. They were, and yourself as well. This is a huge part of the research that went into that, was just trying to ingest a lot of that history of okay, what are the things that have gone wrong before and what needs to be done, because it's pretty overwhelming to start off with. You're like, oh my God, how am I ever gonna
You can't even describe to people who just ask you, hey, is there a good video release of these films? I'd like to
sure.
get one. But before this point, and that's why I was so stunned to hear that you guys had already been putting in the research and not just picking up the license and not just saying, oh, we can make a special edition and make some new features and things and make a better home video package, which is primarily what had happened in the past. And it was just so many baked in issues that go all the way back to the original theatrical releases in all countries, because all you got to look at all the versions and the edits, and they didn't stay the same, and then the preservation is all over the place and in different countries and with different rights holders and entities, and it's one of the most complex histories and preservation histories to unravel. So that these releases are not just upgrades. They're such an incredible achievement, and I still see them on the shelf and have to pinch myself that somebody actually finally went in and waded into the mess and was like, okay, let's try to sort this out as best as we can. Let's go methodically. Let's go one film at a time, one problem at a time.
It was an extraordinary opportunity, and one that we were determined to just absolutely make the most out of. We just wanted to, because, and with all due respect to Kino, who had done the best they could under very limited circumstances as well. It's not, they certainly tried, but we knew that we had the opportunity, particularly given our relationship with Lamage and Richavata, which offered us the opportunity to go back to the original log files and actually do kind of. It's a shame we didn't get to kind of do the restorations from the original scans a bit more, because maybe the results might have been even better. But on the other hand, we probably would still be working on them, because there was just so there were so many stabilization issues and dirt and all these things baked in that just it's the certainly short of going back to the original negatives, which we wouldn't have been able to do. And in any case, the scans that existed were actually, even though they were already 10 years old by that point, they were still very good. And I think they would have been totally serviceable, because from an archival point of view, the negatives, I think some people tend to think of negatives as a means to an end, and that end being a new 4K transfer. They don't really think of it as what it is, which is it's a priceless artifact. It's the film that went through the camera. It's this thing that needs to be protected and preserved and really looked after as much as possible and handled as little as possible. So I think that although in an ideal world, maybe we could have done a new scan or gone back to that unrestored data or used a lot more of it than we did. I still think what we got out of the stuff that was there was, I'm tremendously pleased that we were able to do as much as we did. And, the fact that we were also just very lucky that that stuff was around and that it existed and that we were able to access it. There were all these kind of potential obstacles that could have stopped us from doing what we did at any one time. It could have been an Italian rights holder that said, no, you can't do this, which ultimately did wind up happening with the second and third films in terms of us being able to include the proper Italian versions, which is a bummer. But, at the end, at least we were able to include everything that we did do. And but there were potential roadblocks like that all the way through. It could have been corrupted hard drive data or something, or any one of these things that just could have stopped us from going as far as we did. And so we were very lucky that the materials were there. We were able to access them. We were able to take the time and spend that energy in terms of making sure that we got it as right as we could. And that's a huge part of why I do what I do, and why I feel tremendously lucky to do what I do, because being able to right those wrongs is, that's, I mean, who doesn't want to do that as a film fan? It's so much fun. Very hard work and very stressful, but fun as well.
Yeah, I was going to ask.
It's a masochistic kind of way.
Yeah. I've experienced that to a very small degree, even in my just, my own personal efforts of looking for better audio tracks. And, when you stumble across something, or you manage to, fix something on your own, it's such a wonderful feeling, even if you're just, cobbling together something and at your desk or something like that. But I was curious, what sort of response, if any major responses, have you gotten from studios or rights holders when you've done not just this level of work, but even the work you guys do on improving what you can on existing masters? Like, for example, on To Live and Die in LA, not only were you using the existing 4K master, but you did additional cleanup work because it had quite a bit of damage that ran throughout, and you guys were able to address that and some other things. And then also the sourcing of the original audio track. Do they ever really say anything or talk to you guys about, hey, thanks for improving this element, or doing this bit here, or is it more of just a we think your work's great, thank you? Do they actually pay a lot of attention to the work you guys do?
I suppose it depends on the company and what exactly it is we've done. I don't think something like the To Live and Die in LA example, I don't think they necessarily pay a ton of attention to. But I know that because the reason why we've been able to have these great relationships with companies like Warner and MGM is that is the quality of our work speaks for itself, and they've been very happy with what we've done, certainly from a restoration point of view. And I think that the quality of our extras is going to be very high as well. So that, in terms of fixing small things, I don't know about that. I don't know if that's necessarily on their radar, but sometimes that's a good thing. Sometimes not. You don't want to be under too much scrutiny in terms of what you
because I wondered if they ever are like, we give you this, you work from this, and they don't necessarily want you to upgrade things if you can. Like, are there extra rules sometimes? I know, like, for example, with franchise titles and things that rights holders are, I guess I would say, a bit more protective of, or there's additional considerations and extra rules and things with certain titles. Does that ever cause any particular issues or limit you guys in any way that you might be able to work more freely if it had less of those concerns?
I suppose it depends on what you define as issues. I mean, there is some of that. So again, every studio, every company does things very differently. But the kind of the general overarching theme of not just Hollywood, but I guess the film business in general, but certainly Hollywood, is that lawyers are very prevalent, and people are very skittish about doing anything that might lead to any kind of legal upset. No one wants to get sued. Certainly not us. Certainly not them. So different companies maybe have differing levels of scrutiny or strictness about how certain things are done. So that can be, that can be a negotiating process sometimes, in terms of sometimes they might say, no, you can't do something. Sometimes you can convince them otherwise. Sometimes you can't. You just kind of have to take whatever victories you can. When I was producing the Arrow edition of RoboCop, that was really a full-time job, in terms of literally emailing with MGM every single day in terms of, can we do this? Can we do that? And, sometimes you'd win some battles, sometimes you wouldn't. and you just kind of have to accept that as part of the process. And certainly from a restoration point of view, there are some companies that don't allow us to do anything. So Sony is the big example in that respect. Warner have a kind of quite stringent QC process as well. But again, it's all different depending on who you work with.
Yeah.
And will we get sued? That's certainly the one question that comes up again and again. Like really what it comes down to, which is one reason why, the one thing that comes up again and again on every single title is that everyone wants deleted scenes and alternate versions that have never been seen before. And it's the one thing that consistently, most of the time, you're not allowed to include, because that opens up a whole kind of can of worms in terms of, potentially actors popping up and wanting residuals, or if it's a cut that the director hasn't necessarily approved, or if it's not been finished, or if it's a work print that has unlicensed music in it. All of these questions that come up that make these things much more difficult than fans maybe think. So from major studio titles, it's actually, generally speaking, less likely that you'll see more of these things, regardless of what's come up in the past. Although, again, there are exceptions and there are surprises that come up, and it kind of just depends on what's been done before and what's available. And we keep asking, we keep hoping that it will be allowed, and sometimes it wins. So the one that's come out recently is that we found a work print for The Last Boy Scout, Tony Scott's film, that we're going to be announcing soon, which actually there's not a tremendous amount that's different between the work print and the release version. So people should probably contain their expectations as to what they're going to see in that. It's we're not including the full work print. It's just a highlight reel of the differences. But some of that additional pre-MPAA violence is pretty fun to see all the same. So where we can include some of that stuff, that's really great. And fingers crossed we can do more of it. It's where that kind of thing becomes more common is when we're dealing with non-Hollywood companies. So the Bruce Lee set that's behind you, for example, that's where I was able to go to town on finding alternate cuts and deleted scenes, till the cows came home, because we were dealing with another company, Fortune Star in Hong Kong, who were much more laissez-faire about what they would allow to include. So that's, in terms of consistency, or, the rules are applied very differently depending on who you're working with. And even the same company can be different from what they agreed to 5 years before. So like I said, there's a lot of upheaval in Hollywood, and these things are always keeping you on your toes in terms of what might change and what might not.
Yeah, with this industry, everything's in flux, and
Absolutely.
Every film is different, not just on its status and its preservation and its elements, but every film winds up being different. And as you said, you could have a title go one way, and then have another title with the exact same company and rights holder, but the experience may wind up becoming entirely different. So you have to be able to move and work with that, and it's going to be different every time. And so I'm trying to, at least when I talk about disc releases, or whenever I'm talking with other people, I try to encourage people to think about the ins and outs of, this is also a business, but this is also having to work within the parameters you've got, and it's going to be different every time.
Absolutely. I mean, there are like I said, the rules are different depending on who you're working with all the time. So there are some companies who will not even allow you to acknowledge that the film bombed at the box office, even if it's within an overall narrative of, but it was really successful later on and really embraced later on. They're like, no, you can't say anything negative. This is a promotional piece of material. This is the tone needs to be upbeat throughout. And it's like, oh, okay, it's a bit more boring, but it's finding a way to kind of color within those lines that have been legally prescribed. And sometimes when you have the opportunity to, you can find ways to color out them a little bit, but a lot of the time those relationships are incredibly important, so you want to make sure that you're protecting them, and that you kind of have to follow by the rules in order to make sure that we continue to release films that we want to release. So yeah.
Exactly. My next question would be then about what is the overall, basically, what is the overall sort of QC process when you get to the end of something, and everything from, okay, figuring out who's going to do the disk encoding, because as much as we would love everything to be done by Fidelity and Motion, David and those guys are working 24/7 and have an just a really busy schedule, as does everybody.
Hmm.
But how do you guys determine the final sort of aspects, and then what do you do for your quality control and checking process, and then after that, do you look at the sort of overall responses from critics and reviews and online discussions and things, and how much of that do you sort of take in stride as you're also working on 5 million other things, or having to think down the road of the other 12 things you have on your plate at this time?
Sure. I mean, the QC process is actually there are it gets more involved all the time in terms of we're constantly kind of trying to add steps and kind of ways to make sure that we're anticipating any issues that might come in down the line. So, there's the one level of QC that happens when restorations are being done or when we're taking delivery of acquired masters. So the technical team are watching everything back to front then, trying to anticipate stuff. And then once the discs are being authored, we have a full-time QC team of 2 or 3 people, depending on when it is, who are watching everything that we do, watching everything that's on the discs. Sometimes we farm some of that work out to freelancers as well to make sure that it's all being covered. So it's stuff is definitely all being watched. In terms of, that doesn't mean that things don't unfortunately sneak through. Whether that's usually, it often happens when it's often a last minute thing that kind of, it's one annoying one was, God, was it? It was the cell where there was kind of a flash of something, and that was part of a patch that was meant to fix a different QC issue, but introduced something else. And so it's just one of these things where, unfortunately, didn't get caught, and it wound up being kind of going through to the final product. And like, it's always a bummer when those things go through, but by and large, hopefully, we're able to kind of, we're not always able to kind of correct them or do a replacement program and stuff, but we hopefully we do kind of the main big ones. In terms of where projects get allocated to, again, that's a process that's kind of being discussed all the time. David is brilliant. That is the standard that we always want to shoot for. But we have a really talented team who are working with us in-house at the Engine House Media Services, who are doing work that is every bit as good, I think. Well, I mean, David is certainly, he's the best of the best, and he comes with a very particular skill set in how to encode things to kind of bring up very fine details and work with different types of materials. And that's, our team are very talented, and they don't necessarily have all of that experience that David does, but I think doing incredibly strong work. So in terms of who gets to do what, that's often dependent on a complicated mix of factors. Some of it is to do with the schedule and how busy we are and who's available to do what. That's the kind of banal side of it. But then in terms of how grainy a film is, or what's been released before, or kind of wanting to make sure that it lives up to a standard that's been set by previous releases. It's all a kind of complicated conversation, and while we're never going to stop working with David, but we also have an interest in making sure that our own team does as much as possible, not just from a financial point of view, but also making sure that we're ensuring the future of that company. So it's a complicated mix of factors, and I think that overall the quality of our work is very strong. And where in terms of looking at reactions and reviews and stuff that comes up afterwards, absolutely, we're always looking at reviews that come in, although there aren't as many kind of technically proficient in reviewers as I would like. I kind of wish there were more, but certainly the fan response and the message board response is something that we do pay attention to, even when it's sometimes detrimental to our mental health, to go into that, because it's not always, even when they're expressing things positively, it's not always in the most positive light. So it's a tricky thing to kind of go in and just everyone has opinions, and you're not going to be able to please everyone. So that becomes a separate thing in terms of being able to sort out the useful feedback from the stuff that maybe you don't necessarily need to pay attention to as much. So it is, I certainly won't say that we don't pay any attention to it, but like I said, we can't act upon all of that feedback. So hopefully we're able to, work with the information that we've got, and be able to improve upon our processes, which is something that we're trying to do all of the time within the time and the limitations that we have, and keep on that reputation of doing very strong A-tier work.
Yeah, that's about what I figured, and that's what you can sort of glean just as a fan or somebody who picks up an Arrow release. Even when and things are going to happen. It's an imperfect process. Everybody's human. Things slip through. It's bound to happen somewhere. Again, none of this is an exact science, and you do absolutely the best that you can within the parameters and limitations you have. And you can also tell when a label accepts constructive feedback and also looks at the overall response that a release has gotten, whether it was so well received and so successful that it encourages, okay, we can do the sequel now, or we can do related titles, or if something does happen and it eventually does necessitate needing a replacement program for a particular issue, that just, whether it was in the authoring or the manufacturing or something slipped through, as it will happen, you know actually enacting that and getting that all put together. But also, it's nice to know that a label does actually care to listen to us nerds on the internet.
Sure.
And
And
not to toot my own horn, but when you said, oh, I wish there were some more technically oriented reviewers out there, and I'm like, that's the whole reason why I started making nerdy videos.
well, yeah, and we don't always get it right, but hopefully we get it right way more often than we get it wrong. And I think
Oh,
that's
you certainly do. Yeah.
so it's not to sound too defensive or anything, but I think, well, certainly this is one of the reasons why I deleted my Twitter 2 years ago, was just to kind of make sure that I wasn't getting the brunt of this too much, because as much as I'd love to be able to sort of respond to kind of every other, well, no, I wouldn't love to, but as much as I could respond to sort of every instance of someone being dissatisfied with something, it's ultimately not my job either, where I'm not a customer services rep. I'm just in charge of sort of leading my department, and where I can play an overall role in improving those standards or helping make things better, and kind of anticipating some of these issues that come up. Obviously that's something I very much want to do, but yeah, like I said, hopefully, we've had a few kind of things recently that have come up that have been unfortunate, just because of the volume of titles that we've been working on, where we've been caught by surprise by just how much work has gone into all of it. And it's been a tough year, but hopefully, going forward in the future, that stuff is going to be hopefully more of a thing of the past. He says, hopefully.
Yeah. That was one of the reasons why I really wanted to talk to you, because I don't think that people necessarily always think about the ins and outs and the everyday and the just the sheer workload, in addition to all the production and time constraints and different things. So when things do happen occasionally, which they're bound to happen at some point, um, I just wanted to at least have a little bit more information out there, so people might be able to, you know, put themselves in the place of, okay, what if I was working on something like that? Now that I know the parameters, okay, now it kind of makes sense that occasionally things do happen, and you still do the best that you can, and you fix what you can, and because no matter what, you're still having to do all these other projects within the realm that the company finds itself in, and where the industry is at now.
Yeah, and it's always a tricky balance. I mean, we were talking earlier about the compatibility issues with Panasonic players that a few discs have had recently, and I believe I can reliably say now that we've had the last one come out now, which was Red Sun. I think it's come out, and that's the last disc that should have this issue, because we've been able to identify the problem and find an authoring work around it, which hopefully, I hope we can kind of backtrack and fix some previous discs, but I can't confirm that at the moment. But that's a difficult one where I completely understand people being pissed off about that, because you paid a lot of money for a product and you just expect it to work regardless of any other factor. That's you I can't blame any fan for kind of wanting what they want when they want it. That's not an issue. And
That's my story with the Panasonic 820 itself, because mine's still messed up.
Well, fingers crossed that gets resolved soon. But yeah,
Well,
I mean,
I have to get a new disk drive essentially, because I was one of the people who didn't know that you had to get one of the later models where they made a new disk drive and didn't tell anybody. And it's like, so that's why mine just doesn't work. Wonderful.
I've never felt so vindicated spending £750 on an Oppo 8 years ago, whenever it was. That was, one of the best forward-thinking decisions I've ever made, certainly. But yeah, I think the Panasonic issues, like I said, they're a real pain, but it is an unfortunate situation where obviously Panasonic are saying we're at fault, and we, from our perspective, we've authored the discs correctly. We've authored them to the correct specs. So, I don't want to say we're not going to do anything about it, and that we're just going to be locked in kind of a stalemate, because that's, no one wins out of that situation. Our reputation suffers and all the rest of it. So it's a topic of ongoing conversation. Hopefully we'll be able to resolve it to a point where people are, there's something people are happy with. But at the very least, in the meantime, there are workarounds on the customer end to be able to play the discs. So for anyone at home who isn't aware, if you play a bit of another disc that works correctly with Dolby Vision, don't turn off the player, take that disc out, but then put the other one back, put the affected disc back in. It should then play. That's something that's been proven to work again and again with other people. So it's a pain in the butt, because you've got to spend 30 seconds or whatever it is playing the other disc first. But
I will say I've actually had to do that before. As if you get into Laserdisc, you wind up having to come up with a lot of weird workarounds and be a bit patient. And in particular with the DTS Laserdisc, I think it's because the actual audio is so large, because they took over the whole digital track, and it's the full like 1536 kilobits per second DTS signal. On certain players, it can overwhelm, or especially if you have a laser that's going bad, or it's an older player. Yeah, technically it's supposed to work, but sometimes it can overwhelm stuff and cause the audio to just have issues or drop out entirely. And the only fix is to stop the disc, put in a normal standard disc, play it for a little bit to get a standard PCM signal. Then you can switch back to the DTS disc. And if you're having that player issue, you have to hope that your player will make it to the end of the movie without having to do that a couple times. But one of my first DTS discs, I had that problem, and I had to come up with that workaround because I didn't know what was causing the issue. And then after doing some more digging, I figured that out. So when that fix solution came out, it just made me think, wow, I didn't think I was going to have to employ my old LD fix, but I've done that before. I don't mind. So I think anybody who's a physical media collector who gets into this stuff and has at least enough of a setup that occasionally they have to tinker with something or mess with a receiver setting or something, it's at least something that's doable. Yeah, it's an extra step, but it's understandable under the circumstances.
But I mean, it's funny. We're 6 years into working with UHD now, and we're still being thrown these curveballs. It's a
finicky format
in terms of, absolutely. And we which we didn't anticipate certainly this far in. And it's not that we don't know what we're doing. We're very experienced at this point. And I think one of the problems, if anything, is that we're trying to do too much with UHD. We're trying to we're
push the boundaries.
We're constantly trying to push the boundaries in terms of the amount of seamless branching we can do, the amount of content you can fit on the disc, mixing this, that, or the other, and as opposed to I guess taking the easy way out, which would just be do a vanilla disc and keep it very consistent and line it up. But so it's some of these kind of growing pains still at this stage are kind of, I guess, to be expected. But it certainly does make me quite nostalgic for Blu-ray, which always works the same no matter what player you put it in. And you're guaranteed you're looking at the same image, and there's going to be no quirks with Dolby Vision or whatever else. It's, you know, so UHD is when it's working at its best, it's an extraordinary format.
It's
And
incredible,
it,
but you get the slightest scuff on it, or your player has a hiccup, or it's like there's all these additional things that were not an issue before. So
yeah.
we've moved several steps forward, but now we've also gone several steps backward to the side as well.
Sure, it's a semi-lateral move with lots of other different kind of problems to compensate for all the improvements as well. But you know, the extent to which the audience has embraced UHD is quite extraordinary now. I mean, the ratio, because Arrow doesn't do dual format releases for the most part. It only does UHD, and it only does Blu-ray sort of separately, and which is something that I, you know, initially I was quite against when that decision was made at the company, but I've actually come around to quite a lot because, you know, although for a minority of customers, a dual format disc is very convenient, it also leads to a lot of wastage in terms of the amount of discs that are being pressed, in terms of, you know,
Yeah.
so ecologically, financially, it's not something that makes a ton of sense for us to do a bunch of discs that are going to wind up being coasters for the most part. And you know, so one of the interesting things about that has been able to use that to track the shift in adoption and kind of how people have kind of gradually adopted 4K more and more through the years. And, you know, for a while, UHD was very much in the minority. Then it was kind of a couple of years later, it was sort of more 50-50. And now we're at a point where it's really like 90-10 in favor of percent in terms of UHD. Like it's really, you know, to the point where there are some titles we've done recently where we have, you know, not done Blu-ray editions where we've done UHD because of rights issues, but it's going to come to the point, I'm sure, where we, you know, do it because we're not selling enough Blu-rays for it to make sense for us to kind of spend
Yeah.
the equal amount of time authoring and QCing a Blu-ray disc. So that's, you know, I can see that being a future thing where, although in an ideal world we would make sure that we're doing a Blu-ray as well so that everyone has access to the content, it's you know, business reasons may make that more, you know, less and less feasible for some titles. I don't know. You know, if we've got a choice between authoring a Blu-ray version of a title that we're also doing a UHD on, and it's going to take us the same amount of time and effort that there would to author another UHD that would make us more money, then I don't know. Not to make it all about money, because, you know,
Right, but you have to read the market, and if the market
sure.
shifts one way and it's a particular title, because in a perfect world, I would love to have dual format releases, but
Mm,
for things that are 4K masters, you're having to convert it to 1080p SDR, and you've got to go through and properly do an SDR version of that master, and different people do that different ways, and that takes time. And while I would love having the SDR version of every film as well, because I'm that guy who gets into looking at HDR and catalog titles, and
mm,
it's also much easier making screen caps for nerdy long video reviews of
yep.
Blu-rays than UHDs, because UHD is a whole other kettle of fish or can of worms in terms of, oh, you want to make accurate screen caps? Oh, here's a textbook to try and figure that one out. So you have convenience, and you also have people who haven't adopted UHD, so you always want to retain that market share as well. But as things develop, you have to try and meet the market, and it makes sense that some titles would probably wind up being UHD only down the road if things go further that way. And like you say, you have to allocate your expenses and resources as well. But I would also like to ask the age-old question: do you have a pipe dream title that you would give anything to work on? Is there like something you've gotten maybe close to, perhaps, that you can maybe mention? Or is there just like that mythical, if I could do the like my favorite movie of all time, like is there that pipe dream title? Because there's one I have myself, and I'm curious to ask you about that as well, just in a sort of hypothetical situation.
Sure. I mean, I think we all have them. I think that's part of the hope that keeps on going is that you'll get to do one of these titles one day. I mean, the most obvious example that leaps to mind immediately is having done the Dollars trilogy. We'd love to do Once Upon a Time in the West. Never mind, possibly the other two Leones as well. But Once Upon a Time in the West, and certainly correcting those issues and those mistakes would be a dream. Now, sadly, I don't think it's very likely that Paramount are going to give us the rights to that film anytime soon. But as a fan, I'm still in my own time doing the research and still figuring out if one day we ever got it, what would we do? And
Kindred spirits.
Exactly. And I've got a 35mm print scan. I've got like a list of stuff this in terms of I've come up with timelines of where everything came along. It's all for naught now, but who knows? Maybe one day.
I keep hoping you guys get to tackle Duck You Sucker, because that's the most challenged film of his entire canon, and I keep hoping MGM is really happy with the Dallas trilogy releases. And
they are. Well,
you want to try the really oddball one that only the Leone nerds talk about?
It's MGM are very happy with the Dollars trilogy, and that's not the obstacle. I think if anything, it's just a Duck You Sucker, from what I gather, is a title that has a few more complexities laid into it in terms of the materials and access to them and all the rest of it. So I mean, that's sure. I mean, it's not my favorite of Leone's films by a long stretch, but it's still, it would be an extraordinary one to do for all of that. But yeah, in terms of other titles I'd love to do. I mean, some have been done. Like when another company does a film that you would love to do, it's always kind of a bummer in terms of I had all these ideas. It would be great to do that, but at least you're glad that someone is doing it. So Sorcerer was the recent one where I had the dream edition of that in my head for years. That Criterion had done it. They didn't do everything that I would have liked to have done, but at least someone put it out. That's the thing you've got to bear in mind. Otherwise, in terms of stuff, I mean, there's a ton of stuff I'd love to do in terms of ideas for Arrow. In terms of I mean, I've got ideas about how I'd love to bring back Arrow Academy in a small way. I don't know whether that is really realistic or feasible, and like I say, it's not my company, so I can't although I have input, it's I kind of don't control the direction of how all these things happen. So but as long as I'm still here and still kind of have opinions and thoughts, I'm gonna still fight for it.
Yeah, I had to ask about dream titles, because anybody who knows me, the whole reason why I do what I do, the reason why I got into films and got a film degree, and the reason why I do anything is I'm a total James Bond nerd, and the home video history and preservation of the films of the original series is all over the place. And even though they've done now 2 4K catalog upgrades, and the first one only got released to streaming on and off, and those had issues, and now we have the new ones, but only some have been released physically, and it's debatable if we're going to see the others, and those already have preservation issues, some of which are the long-standing ones and some are new issues. That's my sort of dream title, to if I can work on it or improve it, or if somebody can tackle it, and that's my dream title for Arrow. If any of the original series, the original 20 Bond films, or even the 2 unofficial films that people don't like to talk about or like to say are terrible, and I'm actually obsessed with as well. If any Bond films could ever potentially be in the cards.
Sure. Well, I'll rip the band-aid off from the beginning and say we don't have the rights to any James Bond films at the moment.
Yeah.
But in terms of whether or not MGM, Amazon would be willing to let us do it, I don't see why not. For them, it would be kind of new money for old rope. So I mean, they would, perhaps sometimes you see with some studios they don't want you to do anything that competes with an existing release. But if there's stuff that could be done with it that could help make it more more archivally correct or whatever, then certainly that's a reason for us to do it. If there's extras that haven't been carried over or other avenues to go down that maybe haven't been gone down before, then sure, I don't see why not. But
we're in hypothetical land.
Yeah, we're firmly in hypothetical land. But I mean, certainly I think I can speak for Arrow when I say if we had the opportunity to do a James Bond film, we'd take it. So
Yeah.
it's all just a matter of, again, continuing that relationship with MGM Amazon, and like I said, they're very happy with what we do. They're fortunately in a position now where they can continue to license stuff to us, and that doesn't seem to be stopping anytime soon. So, like, who knows? Maybe
Yeah.
one day. If we
Well,
do, I'll give you a call.
absolutely. Just let me know so I can send my fan brain into overdrive. And if it helps, if this ever happens to come up and there's a meeting, and even if it's just we might be able to look at Never Say Never Again or Casino Royale 67. There are those of us out there who would firmly
Sure.
plunk down our cash for UHDs. And I would, if it were me, I would make a deluxe UHD box set of Casino Royale 1967, because
Yeah.
that film is, it's a wild film, but the people usually don't know the intensive production history of that film. And from what we know, there are basically entire feature films you could make out of the material that was shot and not used, if it still exists somewhere. I mean, there's just
Sure.
that whole film is an experience. But
Yeah. Well,
yeah,
that probably comes back to the point I was saying earlier about we probably wouldn't necessarily be allowed to use that material, but heck,
exactly. Yeah.
we could at least determine if it exists.
Yeah, exactly. And put a note. It's like,
Yeah.
this does exist somewhere, but
You can't.
it's like the
Yeah.
Doctor Strangelove pie fight. It actually exists. It's in a vault, but you're never going to see it.
No.
Yeah.
It's always funny to me how kind of, I suppose, people love the film so much they just want more of them. There was we had when we announced Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles last year, there was a guy who was like, "Well, I'm not going to buy it because it doesn't have any deleted scenes on it." It's like, the best ever presentation of the film isn't enough for you. You need some deleted scenes that don't really exist to justify your purchase.
Yeah,
I don't know.
if
But
they exist, can
if
you
they, yeah,
access them?
yeah,
Are they even possible to be run? Have they deteriorated?
yeah,
And then there's such a thing as, do you have the legal clearances and the permissions? And are
yeah,
you going to have to go get permissions from and pay the residuals to all the actors and the original crew who shot that material? It's like, do the creative original personnel want anybody to see that material? There's a whole laundry list of questions that have to be answered. It would be nice if it was a simple matter of, yes, we can present everything we found because everybody said it's a-okay, and we don't have to get legal permissions and pay residuals and do all this other stuff. But unfortunately, it's everything's more complicated than you would think.
absolutely. But hey, well, like I said, as we'll keep on asking the question, we'll keep on trying, and sometimes we'll win, and sometimes we won't, and hopefully you'll still buy it if either way. I don't know. But
Yeah,
it's
and
we'll always kind of do our best to kind of do the fullest picture of what the thing is, and give fans the most bang for their buck.
And speaking of all those points, I would be remiss if I didn't highlight a particular Arrow production that I still think is not just something that should be locked to or thought of as a physical media supplement. But I would be remiss if I didn't talk some about the Final Game of Death, which
Yeah,
is still just an incredible achievement. And even more so knowing that it was sort of birthed out of, they have all the dailies from the original Game of Death, and they said, "Yeah, you can use these."
yeah,
And there you guys are. You've got limited resources, and you put together, in spite of all the limitations and just being the guys in the office and everything, you put together one of the best, not just documentaries about a film, but one of the most comprehensive depictions of what goes into making any movie, let alone a movie that was famously never completed and had
mm,
such intensive thought put into its construction, and something that also documented the entire production history and allowing the viewer to experience it through seeing all of those dailies, which are just so priceless, even for somebody who doesn't know that much about Bruce Lee, or is just a newcomer into the world of his far too short filmography. I still think that is up there with Dangerous Days and Making a Blade Runner as the best documentary or visual representation about the production of a film. And it is unique in its approach due to the materials you were able to use and how you were able to put all that together, and then doing the final assembly with even a brand new sound mix to make it as close to a what if scenario if this was a Golden Harvest release back then, with a mono soundtrack with the correct age appropriate sound effects and everything. It's just a miraculous achievement, and I had to tell you in person because I think the final game of death should be used in film schools. I said at the time, and I still think that that should have won some sort of special Academy Award, because it is that level of, no one has done this before. No one has presented a film in this way that was never finished, to allow somebody to experience it, but experience the whole of it. And in a lot of ways, I think it's actually the best representation of everything Bruce Lee tried to do in his own films. You learn so much about the man and the artist in addition to the film that never got finished. And it's an incredible experience sitting through it. I watched it entirely in one sitting. I have rewatched it multiple times because I get people to go and watch it. I have shown it to people, and
Wow.
I'm like, this is a new benchmark. This has raised the bar so dramatically in terms of film documentaries and the world of supplemental features, and it shows that supplemental features are not just add-ons or extra incentives. They are so incredibly important about preserving the history of not just a film, but its production, and they're part of its legacy. They're translating its legacy for audiences. So I just wanted to tell you in person how special that was to me, and how I think you guys really achieved something with that.
Well, I mean, what can I say? Thank you very much, Spencer. That's all incredibly kind of you to say. I mean, people have continued to say very nice things about that documentary over the last 3 years, and it still kind of blows my mind. I mean, to be honest, I still can't believe that we finished it, that we did it. It was just a real, in terms of, because it just came about entirely by chance. It was just, we accidentally discovered that La Magia Motivata had the scans of all the rushes, kind of all 2 hours of it, including the stuff that had never been seen before. And well, we've got to do something with it. What can we, we can't just release the box set and be like, oh, by the way, we found the game of death rushes, but we can figure out what to do with them. It was, so I had kind of, the idea kind of slowly formed of what it should be, or what I felt it should be. But I had no real budget to put together. There was no one I could think of really to trust to assign it to, who I knew would finish it by the deadline and to the budget and all the rest of it. So I was like, okay, well, if this thing's going to exist, I've kind of got to do it by myself to some degree, albeit with help with others, of course, people like Brandon Bentley, who are very instrumental in helping get that over the line. And my main inspiration on that was, well, certainly Dangerous Days is an influence, of course, but there's a wonderful documentary called Charles Lawton Directs The Night of the Hunter, which is Robert Gitt from UCLA had all of the original rushes from The Night of the Hunter and put together this kind of chronological set of outtakes that also told the story of the film. And that was really the format that I wanted to use as a kind of exploration of not just the Game of Death project and how it's been kind of misappropriated over the years and kind of misinterpreted in terms of its commercially. Golden Harvest always kind of exploited kind of the 1978 Robert Klaus Game of Death as sort of the proper film in a way that's very commercially expedient to them, but doesn't do any justice to Bruce Lee's intent and what that was originally supposed to be. But also, the amount of rumors that swirled up around it, and the fact that, everyone has an idea of what Bruce Lee meant by the Game of Death, or what it should have been, or how it would have finished, and no one really knows anything, because the only person who really knew in so much as he had any of it in his head, was Bruce Lee, and that's all been gone for over 50 years now. So acknowledging that and acknowledging its status of as an unfinished film and as this thing that exists permanently in limbo, and the fact that really the only way to watch the Game of Death as Bruce Lee intended, in so much as he intended anything, is to watch those rushes in chronological order with no sound. So even the sound that we did apply, you should probably mute it, really, because it's something on top of that still transforms what the thing is. And so, you know, the fact that we finished it in the first place, and the fact that it came out as well as it did, I mean, there's certainly stuff in there that is pretty rough that kind of, you know, speaks to my inexperience in terms of, you know, I'm not a filmmaker, so it's something that was really being done.
There's a wonderful, almost ragtag quality to it. Like you can tell.
Well, thank you.
You know, it's like, because even the small things I do with my own videos, I'm a crew of one, and this is not my primary job, unfortunately. It's sort of an unpaid thing, and I just, you know, do the best I can. And, you know, everything that you complete is at least some sort of victory, even though all you see are the flaws and the, oh, if I had this, or if I had that, or if I had done that, or if I had more time. So that doesn't detract from the experience at all. And in fact, for me, because I could, you can recognize the effort that has to go into something, it makes it all the more special.
Yeah, I'm going to dangle a thing that's going to torture you. Very nearly, we could have done a very similar documentary with the Fistful of Dollars rushes. And in fact, I really wanted to do that. I wanted to do a documentary that would have been called Sergio Leone Directs The Magnificent Stranger. That would have been, you know, a kind of feature-length thing of all the outtakes telling the story of the film, but we just didn't have the time to do it. It just, you know, we had all the rushes.
You weren't kidding. That is killing me, because I went through the whole compilation is so beautifully put together by everybody, and I went through that thing frame by frame. I'll admit.
Oh, I mean, so the
instant it starts and the Magnificent Stranger skateboard comes in, I'm like, aha! And then the first thing is the cut opening of stealing the poncho, and I'm like, oh my god, they actually shot it! Oh.
Yeah, you know, who knows? Maybe one day there'll be an opportunity to go back to that stuff and do it again, because we've still got all the scans and everything. And Jordan Krug did an amazing job of sorting, because it was all completely out of order. And Jordan Krug did an amazing job of putting it all in chronological order. So hats off to him for figuring all that out. But as well as sorting out what was, you know, unused material or outtakes, and you know, he was an amazing help with all of that. But yeah, the final Game of Death, I think, is certainly something. But I'd be very lucky if I had another opportunity to do something like that ever again, where it was a real, as part of that. I mean, that Bruce Lee box set is, you know, even though the Bruce Lee films are probably far from my favorite films that I've worked on, in terms of, you know, they're not ones that I'd necessarily go back and rewatch again. It was an extraordinary opportunity to do all of the stuff that I really wanted to get into this business to do in the first place, which was, you know, find lost footage and do these kind of huge, crazy extras that really delved into every aspect of a film or a project or a filmmaker. And, you know, to have the time and the energy and the freedom to do all of that was just, you know, I certainly, that feels like a very lofty word I probably am not justified in using, but kind of my masterpiece as a producer. That was the point.
It's a watershed, you know, or landmark physical media release for sure. Yeah, that was the point. Yeah, that's, you know, that is, they are achievements. The Bruce Lee Golden Harvest set, the Dollars trilogy releases, you know, they're not just physical media releases. They're not just great extras. They are achievements. They're in that pantheon of the great physical media releases that do everything possible to preserve the legacy of films and give them the best presentations they've ever had, and the best presentations possible at that particular time. So yeah, they are absolute achievements for sure.
No, well, thank you very much, Spencer. It's, you know, like I said, that was the stuff that I wanted to do before I even joined Arrow, and to be able to do all of that is just, you know,
exactly. So is there anything that you have in the pipeline that you might want to plug, or is there anything that you're I'm sure most of your time is eaten up by by your work at Arrow. But do you have any other side pursuits you want to mention or plug, or do you have anything that you can talk about a little bit as a potential way to whet people's appetites?
uh, I don't know about side hustles. I think Arrow takes up quite a lot of my time. But I mean, in
Yeah.
terms of, I don't know when you're planning on releasing this, but I mean, certainly we've got our October announcements coming up, which there's some really exciting stuff there where we've been able to, get some dream titles and kind of do an extra something with them. In particular, on the Golden Princess side, we're going to be announcing the Chinese Ghost Story trilogy, which all three of them are in 4K. We've corrected the colors on the first one. There's a ton of additional extras, including a really amazing documentary from German TV that's got, not just behind the scenes footage of the Chinese Ghost Story 3, but it's also got interviews with John Woo and Jackie Chan and Choi Hark and all these other people. And that's a really amazing thing to see. Beyond some of the titles that have already been kind of teased out in the public, like The Last Boy Scout, Logan's Run, some other great stuff from the Warner deal. It's an exciting year ahead. There's some stuff coming up that I didn't think I'd ever get to work on that we're going to be doing, and keep your eyes peeled. That's there's plenty of exciting stuff coming on at Arrow. So fingers crossed, you guys are all along for the ride.
Well, I certainly am, because just the announcements that keep happening, and especially the stuff from the Warner deal. I mean, you guys are already some of the announcements, like Forbidden Planet is one of those dream titles, because
Yeah.
that is such an important landmark for the genre, and it's got multiple audio mixes that have not been preserved or presented on home video before, and it had a really solid Blu-ray, but it was getting on up there in years, and there was a lot of room for improvement. But I had that was one of those titles where I sort of lost hope that it would ever get deluxe treatments beyond what it had already gotten. And you guys are hitting a lot of those major milestones in the Warner catalog. If first it was Westworld, then Excalibur, and you're moving through, and every month it's just a plethora of, oh my gosh, how did they get this? Also, how am I going to afford all of these? How can I budget and hopefully spread it out enough, and manage to get all the limited versions before they sell out? But I know everybody is excited to see where Arrow goes, and you guys are really leading the charge for catalog films on UHD, and doing new restoration work, and pushing the boundaries of the format and what you can do, and also building both legacy and new extras packages. So it's really wonderful of you to spend your time here talking to me on my nerdy little YouTube channel. So I truly appreciate it, and I hope people listening have at least been able to get a greater sense of more of the, not necessarily behind the scenes, but more of the day-to-day operations, and that everything's always a work in progress, and there are certain parameters and limitations, but you guys truly do the best that you can, and you are in certain ways really, I think, leading the industry and catalog titles, and moving into the UHD format. So thanks so much, James, for talking to me, and I can't wait to see where Arrow goes in the future.
Thank you very much, Spencer, and thanks for all your support as well.
Oh, my pleasure. I've been an Arrow customer for a while, since at least about, oh gosh, I guess about 2015, 2016. So it's been about 10 years.
Well, as long as you and other people keep buying them and supporting us, we'll keep doing it. That's so as far as I can see, the future looks bright. So, plenty of exciting stuff coming up ahead.
Absolutely. Well, thank you, James, and thank you to everyone watching here. I hope this has been at least somewhat fun and informative. And as always, thank you ever so much for watching.